What? Why are you directing the show while we're live, Brian? My
I'm just
God.
saying, put Zeb in the middle. He doesn't need to be down in the
Zeb
corner.
doesn't want to be in the middle. Do you ever think about asking what Zeb wants, Brian? Jeez. Hey there, hi there, ho there. It's Steve Bear, the Gen X GM.
Wow.
Hope you're all doing all
Which
right.
one of these two do I piss off?
You know what? You know what? Zeb goes right there. That's where Zeb goes. Zeb goes above you, Brian, where he belongs, like a heavenly creature. And, how y'all doing? Hope you're doing all right. We're streaming on 5 channels right now, so that's great news. Welcome everybody from everywhere that's being here. Of course, we've got Sean from Aegis Musings, we've got Brian from Gaming with ADHD, GM Cody, and of course Logan from the Hilt. And then joining us, of course, is our very special guest, Mr. Dave Zeb Cook. And thank you so much for joining us, sir. You are, I hate to use the term living legend, but let's call it what we call it. It is what you are, sir. So thank you so much for joining us.
I just saw somebody post my name on the ancient D&D gamers group or something like that.
You know, when I spoke with you, I've interviewed Jeff Grubb 2-3 times now, and he speaks very highly of you. And he sort of had the same thing going on. I was like, I'm just an old man who used to play Dungeons and Dragons. It was like, yeah. Maybe to other people, but to this world, you are someone who has great. Yeah,
well, this whole Fritzig anniversary thing is kind of frightening because then I start looking at how long have I been doing this?
Yeah, a little bit longer than the rest of us, and I've been around for a while myself. Sean, you're close to my age, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm 51 this year.
Yeah, so you've been doing a little while too. The rest of you kids, just be quiet. Anyway, I have been fighting a splitting headache all day, so I made a deal with Cody, which was this. Cody will be hosting for the rest of the show, and I will just be a regular old panelist. So take it away, Cody.
Nothing Excellent. Regular about you, Bear.
What? Well, I think this is a great way to do issue number 30 of the 4-Color Cafe, and I'm extremely excited to have you, Zeb. Really appreciate you coming on. It means a lot to me personally because you're the first game designer I was made aware of ever, and the reason being is because I started with AD&D 2nd edition, and so as a kid, when I picked up the AD&D 2nd edition Player's Handbook, you wrote the foreword, of course. And so I read that, and at the end it says David Zeb Cook, and I thought, what a cool name, Zeb. I want to meet this guy someday. So it's really truly a pleasure and honor to have you on and talk to you. So we're going to keep things in order tonight. I'm going to start off the questioning, and then we're going to kind of go around all of the panelists asking questions as well, and they could add in any remarks or questions they have as we go, and just let it flow naturally. And then I thought at the end we would reserve some time for the audience, of course, to ask some questions. So to start off then.
Excuse me, point of parliamentary procedure. Unlike Brian last time, if someone super chats, we ask their question immediately because they paid money to speak to this man. You understand?
Absolutely. We will answer your question immediately. But I always like to start off these conversations with this. It's a 2-part question. One, how did you get into the gaming hobby? When did you get into it? And also, I think the other question we all want to hear is, how did you get involved and wrapped up into TSR?
Okay, well, this first one is where I kind of reveal my ancientness, I guess. I actually basically, played games pretty much as a kid. When you grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, you learned to play a lot of games, card games, board games, this sort of stuff. So I always had done that, but I never really, this was like there are gamers. This was just like family kind of stuff. And then eventually got started with the Hex and Chit board games, the war game kind of stuff, because there was, at that point, there was no role-playing games. But these were much more intricate, that kind of stuff for people with rule books that make your eyes bleed and very intricate kind of things, and played those often mostly solo because there still weren't a lot of other gamers around.
Right.
And went off to college and found there was actually a game group there that played board games and this sort of stuff, and did that. And then after about a year and a half or so, I'm never quite sure when, got one of the players in the group was like going on about this great game that he had been playing, which turned out to be Dungeons and Dragons, the old white box. And explained it all, and it was kind of like, oh, this is pretty unusual. And I was a theater minor, so that was oh, this sounds like almost acting, which I hate, but it's but I was behind the stage production kind of guy is my approach to it all.
Right.
But so got in a game and quickly discovered, wow, this is really great. This is a whole lot more fun than pushing little chits around, even because things move much faster and you didn't have to sit there and argue about every rule. That comes later when once we got more rules into D&D. And so did that. And our game group went on to even publish a little fanzine, which was involved with that. And then I went off and was a teacher for a whole glorious 2 years, and in the middle of nowhere. And so there wasn't a lot of gaming opportunities, but by this point I was definitely a D&D player. But one day Dragon Magazine ran an ad in there. I can't remember what issue it was. It was like issue 20 something or something like that, I think. And they were looking for game designers. They had never posted ads looking for game designers or anything like that. And so at the time I was like, this is way more interesting sounding than teaching in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, of course.
And so my wife agreed, yes, go ahead, give it a try. And so I wrote and said, expressed interest. They wrote back and said, great, here's what you need to do, which was they sent me a whole bunch of questions and also write a sample adventure. And the questions were ranged from, were definitely in the category of how much have you absorbed of Gary's, articles and strangeness in Dragon Magazine and this sort of stuff. And, how familiar were you with the rules? And by the way, and then just lots of other random questions, like identify this pole arm. Gary was always really big on pole arms or something. And so
You don't say.
fortunately, I had the article that had been done in Dragon Magazine that identified all the pole arms. So, but anyway, so did all that and wrote a short adventure and sent it off and didn't think much about it at all. So then it was much to my amazement that they responded and said, yes, we would like to have you in Lake Geneva to come up to Lake Geneva for an interview. And that led to the kind of embarrassing thing saying, I can't afford to get to Lake Geneva.
Right.
And so, had to work on an arrangement with them to get up to Lake Geneva. And did this interview with Gary and various, and Lauren Schick and a few other people who had already been hired. And, it seemed to go well, but didn't know anything, went back. And not long after that, I heard that, they wanted to hire me. So
is it, I heard a story about you when you were doing your interview with Gary Gygax that you actually stayed at his house after the interview.
Yeah. So this will give you an idea of just how I won't say unprofessional, but I will say unprofessional.
Right.
The company was at that point, in that they never thought oh yeah, we should get him a hotel room or anything like that. And so it was like, well, where am I staying? And the answer was, well, you can come. Basically, you can sleep on Gary's couch out on his closed-in porch.
Better than a cot in the garage.
And it was a nice place. It was nice. The weather was nice. It was spring, so there wasn't terrible or anything like that. And it also meant that we could sit up and I had dinner with Gary and could sit up and then just talk a lot afterwards. And then I stayed on the couch and slept and So
what was your first impression of meeting Gary Gygax? I'm assuming this is the first time you had met him, right?
No, I might have run. I think I briefly saw him at one of the earlier Gen Cons that I had gone to up at the Hort Hall, but not enough to like form a real opinion about him or anything. And no, Gary is a very personable guy. He was a pleasure to talk to. He was interesting. He had lots and lots of opinions on everything, and he's he was always very good at interacting with people, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I had a very favorable opinion of him at that point because hey, he was going to hire me maybe.
Oh, yeah, sure. You got to work in the gaming business, right? So you interviewed with Gary Gygax. I guess you went back and then you told your wife the good news, and y'all immediately moved up to Lake Geneva. I'm assuming.
Well, we went back to Lake Geneva. I went back to work, and I waited to find out, and then we heard the good news, and it's like okay, worked out so that could end the school year, and then basically moved up right after the end of the school year to Lake Geneva, and started work there. I think I was employee number 24.
Wow. Well, yeah, I was about to say
people working in the dungeon hobby shop, and there are like 1 or 2 man shipping department, that sort of thing.
Right. So you got hired, if correct me if I'm wrong, 1979.
Yeah, 79.
Okay. So I was thinking about it today. Was there anybody employed in TSR as long as you were? Because you were there for a long time, from like 79 to 94.
Well, Harold Johnson was he was there for I think he was still there when I left. That was a little unclear because there were waves of layoffs at times, and I forget who got laid off and who didn't.
Right.
There was Jim Ward may or may not have been there because again he went laid off, would come back, this sort of thing. There were, and Lawrence Schick was there, but he left very shortly. He left after only a few years. I think Steve Winter actually started just before me and was there for like a very long time.
Yeah. But needless to say, you were there almost as long as anybody, it seems like to me. So when you got hired, when you got hired on at TSR, what was the first things they had you doing there?
Mostly doing development work on other stuff. So I think some of the first things I worked on were Queen of the Demon Web Pits, as doing development on that. Basically, Dave Sutherland had written it and done the adventure, and so then we had at that point, we were still trying to figure out all our processes. We didn't know, like how all this was supposed to work because nobody knew. So we had basically some of the team were considered like development, and their job was to take like outside work or other people's work and then run it through a pass. It wasn't quite editorial, but it wasn't just full on. I'm just going to design everything. It was to go through and like ask all the questions, fix anything that they saw was like really an error, and then. At times argue with the original designer about like, hey, I think this was going to be better if it was done this way, that sort of stuff. So I worked with Dave a bunch on that and to get that out. And then I also early on did like the editorial pass on the Awful Green Things from Outer Space, the first time they did the box set for that. I think the first kind of like module that I actually wrote was the A1 from the A series, because we had the tournament, and so that was like one of the first ones that was actually I was like, oh, I did that kind of thing.
So that's kind of interesting about the editorial process. So they were just kind of passing around. Everybody would kind of view each other's work as it was being made.
Sort of, not everybody. I mean, Gary's work would come in, and Gary's would go off to generally a very, like one particular, because Gary was very, very, I will say protective of his stuff, and didn't like people changing it without his absolute and utter like, oh yes, and that even included at times just editorial changes, just for readability and sort of stuff like that. So it was quickly learned that there were people who were better at dealing with Gary than not in that level. and so we let them do those things.
Well, just I do know some of the people, but just who were some of the people that Gary like trusted with those kind of things?
Well, initially there weren't a lot of us, so Steve Winter wound up doing, I think, a fair amount of it, and also Lauren Schick, because he was the head of the design department, kind of at that point dealt with a lot of it, and sometimes it just went straight to an editor.
Right.
A lot of times it just went straight to an editor. Gary would would do a manuscript and turn it in, and then that was it.
Yeah. So you really got in there when D&D was really taking off, like 1979, 1980. This is when first edition AD&D came out. To me, this is the golden age. I call it the golden age, like in comic books. This is like the golden age of D&D and role-playing games. What was the mood like? What was the feeling like at TSR when, AD&D, D&D just kind of seemed to explode, right? Because it really started to take off right about that time that you joined.
Yeah, I mean, it really started going in about 1980, 1981. I can't remember when the Dallas Egbert steam tunnel nonsense started, but that was really the thing that tended to, the kind of marks the point where it kicked into overdrive. And frankly, for us, it was like amazement. First off, is like, oh my God, what is going on? All that sort of stuff. And definitely joy, because they increased our salaries and kind of rewarded us in ways, and so we were very appreciative of that. And basically, and suddenly it was like, oh wow, this is more than just five guys in a garage kind of a game thing, and that also increased a lot of the pressure, because when they finally worked out the deal with Random House down the line, suddenly now we had like real, oh my God, we have to hit, there are deadlines we have to hit, there are delivery dates we have to make, and also the amount of product we had to do just kept increased. Initially, when we were doing stuff, they'd say, okay, we want this out, guys, we'd like this done in this quarter, and that was like usually kind of when it hit, but because things weren't promised to a major that much to a major distributor, they wanted things. They wanted the distributors to get things in certain quarters, but it was a little less of, oh yeah, this has to be done right away. It has to be this has to be done by this date exactly, kind of a thing. When we got bigger, that became much more of a reality. And also then, we had to make sure we had quality. Were we hitting the quality that the company wanted? And so that actually forced us all to start like kind of changing, because they were also very much about wanting to get into the to kind of break through into that mythical mass market, and that meant we had to change. We couldn't just write things for ourselves. We had to write things that were going to appeal to a lot of people. We had to learn how to do all that too. Right. Because none of us knew how to do any of this to start with. We didn't even know what product we could make that would sell versus what products we shouldn't make.
Well, I think TSR really set the standard, as well as Avalon Hill. We were talking about Avalon Hill earlier. They might have. No, TSR did. TSR really set the standard for, making gaming approachable. I think the gaming hobby outside of board games, casual board games, and that kind of stuff. Because before that, it was marketed towards hardcore nerds, right? Hardcore gaming nerds. And like you were talking about earlier, where, your eyes are bleeding, reading these manuals with numbers on them and stuff like that. And yeah, the early D&D stuff was like that, but quickly you guys adapted and tried to start making things that were very accessible and easy to read and easy to digest. And that brings me into my next thing I want to talk about, which is BX, because you're responsible for the X in BX, right?
Yeah.
So, and to me, this is still one of the most approachable versions, and probably I still think one of the best versions of D&D to this day. So how did this
for conventions?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I think it's, even in the OSR community, there's just hundreds and hundreds of clones of this, right? Everybody's really going back to this. So tell me a little bit about this and how you got involved in. Was this like your first major rules product?
Yeah, this was the first really adventure in like, okay, we're going to actually trust you, and me and Tom Mulvey and in a sense the overall design department in a way, with really doing a major kind of cornerstone product. And we had been doing modules and all these kinds of things prior to that, but this was for this it was like, okay, we need to they had the various basic books before this, and John Holmes had taken a pass at trying to convert D&D into something that was more accessible, and he did a good job. But they then wanted us to they really wanted to get something that was a product with a product line and a clear appeal to people younger than college age.
Right.
And ideally, as far as I know, they would be happy if it would appeal and been playable by 6-year-olds, but we knew we couldn't go that low.
Yeah.
But they wanted to reach as many people as possible, and they knew that a lot of younger players were out there because it was already starting to filter down from college age people down to other into other levels at that point. So yeah, Tom took on the writing of the basic, and I was working the expert. But because the two things are so intertwined, we wound up basically spending a lot of time just working out all of the kind of overall design fundamentals and all this sort of stuff as a team, because neither of us could just say, "Oh, I'm going to have it do this," because it all had to flow together and fit. And plus, because all of this was big important, we had to kind of walk through this with everybody else, present it to, Lawrence Schick was involved, definitely working on helping work out the whole thing. And then we would have to present to Gary, kind of like this is the approach we're taking on things. This is what we're doing, and go over all that with him. And then when it came down to it, we had to get these things written. Tom, who was a phenomenally fast and good writer. I'll say at that time I was a fair writer and not tremendously fast. But so he had the shorter deadline because of that. And meanwhile, I continued working on the expert while after we'd done all this. So the end result was that that's one of the reasons why the Isle of Dread module that went in the box is co-authored by Tom and I, because it was like, I don't have time to do this entirely myself. And Tom was like, he like I said, he was a very good, very fast writer. And so, so we agreed to kind of split up that workload so that we can make our deadlines, get everything done and out in time. There was a lot riding on us delivering, in time to do everything.
Somebody brought up a good question here, and I kind of know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from you. Is Jay Tyler brought up, did Mr. Cook get to say, did you have any say about the art or the artist that was involved in your work, or was that up to somebody else?
The art was mostly handled by art. We had an art department by this point, and we had, a lot of very good artists. And so mostly what would happen there is we would come up with, between us and the editor would kind of work out the layout and say, we've got space on page 37. We're going to want art here, here, here. And usually then, if the editor wasn't going to do it, then we would write up like an art description. Here's a piece we want. Here's the piece we think would be appropriate there. We learned that writing a good art description was also in itself a craft, because you had to learn how to think, like, what can I tell the artist that is just enough but not too much? Right. It's like you can't ask for like, I want 10 guys all in a fight in a big melee, because they say like, it's not going to be a good picture. And you also couldn't say, I want one person who looks exactly like this and give them so much detail, because that would make them unhappy too. But basically, once we did that, that would go to those art requests would go off, and then they were then more or less handled by the art director, who would assign them to artists either on the basis of, I really want these guys working on this project, or and there might be like, you might have had one or two people chosen that way, but then a lot of it was also basis on who's got time, who's got scheduled time to do this. And so that's why you see a bit of a mix of art throughout all of it, because some of this says, all right, who do I think can do this art well, and some of it is also, and then who are other people who can do it, also do it well, but we're working on other projects at the time, that sort of stuff, and so could only contribute a few pieces.
So other than writing descriptions, would you actually physically go down to the art department and talk to the artist and look at what they were working on, their sketches, or would they send sketches to you or anything like that? Or did you just send a description and they did something? And then
was downstairs, and so he just went downstairs down there, and he could go down there and look. But in general, I found that it was often better to not get too pokey nosy with them.
Absolutely,
because then they kind of got like, hey,
right.
But generally it was go down, look, and then go like, oh, that looks cool, and walk away, and not to kind of like try and like critique art direct it too much.
Say that again, or I'll make your T-Rex even fatter. Go ahead, say it.
Well, I don't want to hog all the questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, I do want to bring something up. Len Pimentel is in the chat. Len has a company called Lakeside Games. He designs a lot of stuff. He's doing quite well for himself, and he's a huge fan. Wishes he could be here tonight, as he's usually a panelist with us sometimes, but sadly his computer has kicked the bucket, so he's dealing with that. But he wanted you to know that he is a huge fan of your Conan material from TSR, and it's what actually first inspired him to become a game designer.
Wow,
so that's the first thing. Second thing is, and that's building on that, is as I said, we had Jeff Grubb on a couple of times, and he mentioned that you were kind of instrumental in solving a couple of problems with the Marvel superheroes game, and I'd love to hear more about that process, because that is my number one all-time favorite
I'm trying
game.
to figure out what things I was instrumental in solving exactly.
I think color charts were mentioned in that.
Okay. So I don't know which one of us first started using the color charts, because I know I used them in the Indiana Jones game, but I can't remember if that was before or after Marvel.
Okay.
But we had the problem was because Marvel was a huge sliding power scale, and then how would you have completely different power level characters kind of working in the same game? And but in general, a lot of the way these things kind of came about is we would, basically we had a kind of a big conference area that for the designers was our library, game library, and other stuff. And a lot of times we would like sit up there and eat lunch with the group and just, chat and bullshit and all this sort of stuff. And it was also an opportunity for people to kind of talk about what they were doing, maybe, or if they were having trouble, questions, they could try and help, or wanted to bounce ideas off about. And while I can't remember the specific things I helped Jeff with on this, I suspect it was one of these cases where he was sounding out the problem. Here was the problem he had, and this was the approach he was thinking about. And then basically there's a lot of feedback and sometimes you find just one person maybe that you can work with really well and kind of get that feedback from, and sometimes it's they might be a bunch, but so I suspect that I probably came up with like, hey, you could do something like this, and that becomes kind of an aha moment for him. It's not like I designed it, right? But it was more like, oh wait, yeah, now if I you can run off with that idea. And then so I don't think I didn't design particularly anything that I can think of in Marvel, but I do suspect that in some of these sessions I may have said, what if you tried this, or or I was looking, or something like that.
That's cool though, man. Like the idea that you guys were working in a bullpen is a really cool thing to, first of all, like this idea of just kicking ideas around with each other over lunch is a fantastic working environment as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, the cross-pollination between all of you in those days of TSR is evident. You can see the tendrils of each other's design philosophies.
We were always stealing each other's ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to comment, like, I love your story about, don't push the artist too hard. So that's why for my publishing, I have an art director. He pushes the artist hard. I just go, no, send that back. That's the end of the conversation. So I can relate perfectly. Anybody else want to grab the mic and ask some questions?
First, I want to say thank you for being an inspiration to me as an author and a game designer. Like Cody, I was introduced to you through second edition, even though the first book I ever got was the old expert rule book. And my question is related to that. When you were in the design process, especially on the map of the known world, was that a lot of minds at work, or was that all you?
No. That was not all me. In fact, it's been well established. If you look out there, that the known world, actually, the core of it comes from a campaign that Mulvey and Schick had been playing with, because they played together before they had played as part of a group somewhere in Cleveland, I think, before they actually got hired to TSR. They knew each other then. And so when we got to doing all the expert, we realized, hey, we need a setting. You can't just say, hey, you're going to go do this wilderness thing. We need some kind of a setting. And the thing was, because Greyhawk was Gary's, and he was very protective of that property. We couldn't use Greyhawk. We couldn't just say, hey, and now we'll set this all in Greyhawk or that sort of stuff. And so we needed to have some kind of, like, here's an example of a setting that you can do. And also with the idea that, this was still in the time period when, you didn't buy settings. You got a bunch of rules and you generally made up your own setting and all this sort of stuff. So this was also kind of a bit of a guide to how to put something together. So they had the skeleton of this, and I know that, definitely contributed, stuff to that. But we started from a framework that was a campaign that they had been doing.
Right on. I was going to ask this question too. Jay Tyler brought it up. How did you, before, I know you guys, well, in the beginning days when you first started, how did you guys play test your stuff?
Well, we play tested kind of like, initially, especially, we play tested kind of like you would. Normally we would usually after work sometime, go to somebody's house. We might, if they had something want to play test it, they would, they'd run the session, we'd play test it, that sort of thing. And we did a lot of that, like when we were working on Star Frontiers. We ran a lot of stuff, a bunch of Star Frontiers games and things and whatnot. And it got to the point, though, that between the volume of stuff that we had to do and kind of the time that was available, got less and less for after work kind of playtest sessions and these sorts of things. But at the same time, the amount of experience that we were all getting just by doing all this stuff led to kind of less of a need for playtesting on some stuff. Like, if you're writing a module, you usually could have a pretty good idea of, like, okay, this should work. And I've written, and mostly right, I've written some clunkers that maybe probably I should have not have done, but you would often, what you would do is you would do more kind of a thought testing kind of approach. You'd come up with something, and then you'd go find somebody and say, like, okay, you've got a party. You're going to come into this room, and this is what are you going to do? And they'd tell you what they thought, and you'd be like, oh, do I have that covered? Do I need to cover that? Okay. And then you go off, and so you did enough of that, and after a while, you could be pretty confident that you had most of it down. So, and balance became just kind of a thing that just kind of like started to, all right, I know these guys can beat this thing. I know that this probably is going to be too tough. And so, yeah, you work through a lot of it that way too.
Yeah, just experience. Speaking not really on the playtesting, but did you guys game, you guys in the office, the bullpen, if you will, at TSR. Did you guys just game for fun?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you all play, and how often?
Oh, well, we played everything from, again, we played role-playing stuff. Call of Cthulhu was always popular. I would run some Call of Cthulhu campaign, and mind you, all our campaigns suffered almost always the same problem that every campaign, which is after about 5 or 6 sessions, suddenly it all starts to fall apart because people can't make it, or it's been delayed, all that sort of stuff. But hey, but you get to have fun anyway. Traveler, I think, was people were playing Traveler. There were a fair number of some of it was it was games that were doing by other company, role playing games. It was harder though because role playing games what you did all day, so you tended to want to look for what other. We did play a lot of board games. And again, we had a small group of us that were kind of diehard old war gamer types. So we played, paper and chip, hex and chip games, and then also miniatures games. We had a great fondness for war game miniatures and that sort of stuff. And then we made up games. we made up stuff.
Yeah. If you have a bunch of game designers playing games, of course you're going to make up games, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
They weren't always good, but they were fun.
Yes. Speaking of the miniatures games, so you guys were still playing, I'm assuming historical miniatures games at that time?
Yeah, we were playing historical miniatures. We were doing big fantasy battles. So Tom Mulvey had like a whole bunch of Renaissance figures, so we would do those. I had like some medievals and ancients and that sort of stuff. And occasionally we do those. There was a big group that would play colonial miniatures, and and these included people from other departments, like
right. Yeah.
It wasn't just the game designers played. It was like, oh yeah, like people working in the dungeon hobby shop will play, and executives. Occasionally Gary would come down and would play this sort of stuff. And then we played I made up a set of rules for Play-Doh, and let's see, Lawrence made up a set of rules that was plastic army men and dinosaur toys.
Was that the rule set that got published? Wasn't that in Dragon Magazine? There was a rule set that was floating around with army men and plastic dinosaurs.
That quite possibly could have been, yeah. It was a super simple rule set. We never, most of these were like 1 page of rules kinds of things.
Yeah. I kind of want to know about the Play-Doh game. Play-Doh and Plunderings? Is that what
no, that got published in Dragon as Claydonia. As Clayorama. You were citizens of Claydonia, and it was Clayorama was the game. But yeah.
Well, let's talk about a fan favorite because it keeps getting mentioned. And it is kind of a cult classic. Is Star Frontiers. So, how did Star Frontiers come around? And
well, Star Frontiers came around because Traveler came. Yeah. Because Traveler was out and was doing well, as far as kind of a hobby kind of a game, and so. One of the things that TSR always kind of looked to is how can they expand their line beyond just D&D, and so they said, well, let's do a science fiction game. And so Lawrence and I were big science fiction fans, so we said, and we had kind of the schedule time, so we said, okay, we will design, we can design a science fiction game. We met a lot with Gary to talk about it and go over it, and basically, it was like, they wanted something that could kind of go up and be competitive to Traveler, and we had played Traveler, and we kind of, there are things we liked about Traveler. There were definitely things we didn't like about Traveler. So we said, all right, we can do this. We'll try. But we wanted to make a game that was more accessible and felt like good science fiction and offered a lot of possibility. So we did this game, Star Frontiers, and then we turned it over for editing. And at this point, things go south, and apparently the executives decided that what we had delivered was not what they had requested, even though it was what they had requested. They somehow, however, changed their minds about what they needed. And instead of saying, "Hey, we've decided that we needed to go a different direction and let's go back and fix this," they kind of blamed us for not delivering what we were supposed to. And because they had now decided, they wanted something that would appeal much more to 10-year-olds,
Gotcha.
as opposed to kind of the more serious science fiction reader level kind of thing. And so instead of saying go back, rework this, and which we would have done, they decided at that point, oh my God, it's clearly we must panic and do emergency, and they gave it to a whole bunch of other people to rework.
Wow.
And it became Star Frontiers. Same name, has tons of stuff, is all there. The game system that I designed, that is the game system that we worked with. But things that really got changed kind of significantly were things like they decided, we need to have essentially a space version of orcs, and so they took one of the races and turned them to the Sathar. They just kind of renamed the name slightly. It's the exact same critter, the worm guys with the little tentacle things. Those were a playable race originally, and they were as a playable race, they were probably good candidates to become orcs because they were the amoral kind of we will do whatever we kind of need to do kind of guys, which always made for an interesting party dynamic. But and then basically put it out, and our names got removed from the product,
Right.
Which led to, frankly, it led to a lot of bitter feeling, and led to ultimately, I think, Lawrence deciding he needed to go someplace else.
Yeah.
And so for a long time that was a very sore subject for me. And I'm glad that people like the game. I'm glad people do like the game. They have fond memories of it, but it is not what we originally set out to do.
Did you ever consider reworking it and republishing it as its own thing the way you wanted?
TSR owns the rights, not me.
Well, I mean, a similar style game that was more along the way what you wanted, if you follow me.
Didn't seem like it'd be worth the trouble.
Right.
By the time I was able to the point where I could do that, it's not worth the trouble. I think game stuff has advanced so far beyond that.
So then we come to Zebulon's Guide to the Galaxy.
I had nothing to do with it.
Yet they stole your name, right? Like Zebulon was clearly a wink and a nod, right?
Yeah.
That seems to be Star Frontiers seems to be the most divisive game I've ever seen. People either love it or hate it, or they love Zebulon's Guide or they hate it, et cetera, up and down the map, right? If you could have your druthers, let's say someone showed up with just a truck of money and said, I'm going to pay you for the next, year to design your Star Frontiers, and we're going to release it as, I don't know, Star Dungeon or whatever the hell we're going to call it. Would you want to go back and take that step and get the game that you really wanted out, or are you that's water under the bridge moving forward?
For me, because I'm kind of been sometimes accused of having a low boredom threshold, I would probably say, I think somebody else should do this.
Fair.
I've actually gone back late in the last 5 years or so and stuff, and I've read through Star Frontiers, and I've played some games of it at conventions and stuff. And I look back and I go God, these rules are terrible. And I look at it and it's I should never have done that. That's a bad idea.
Yeah. I'm going to say
I'm glad people like it. I'm glad people think fondly of it.
I always wanted to try it. Never got to it.
It's an interesting thing. I think for me, the Frontier Space guys have done a better job of advancing the conversation, moving it into a new place where it's a much better game than the modern sort of vernacular of how games are played. So that's kind of cool. Brian, come on, man, you must have a question in here somewhere, buddy.
I've been struggling. Honestly, it's been really, really interesting just to listen to Zeb, as you all are pretty familiar with. Anyways, I like the history side. I like knowing where all of this stuff came from. the funny thing, and I'll admit this up front, Zeb. I don't have any history with you.
That's all right, Brian. I don't have any history with you either.
No, right? No, and that no, it is one of those interesting things. Like I, so well, let me rephrase that. I didn't play D&D as a kid. Okay, mostly because I basically just didn't get invited. I didn't know anybody who played. So for me, I remember one experience with D&D, like in junior high. I got invited over to a friend's house one time. Never got invited back to play, but whatever. But
Tori.
It has always kind of stuck with me because I wanted to make a ninja out of Oriental Adventures. And so I mean, come on, let's be honest. It was like 87 to 88. Like that's what we all did back then, you know. But the thing is that even still, it has stuck with me for another 30 years or 40 years. Man, I'm old. But it stuck with me for 40 years, and I didn't even know it was your product until recently. So I'm sorry I don't have a lot of the stories like everyone else here does, but I still want to at least say thank you for giving me this nugget that has followed me along for all of these years.
Do you still want to be a ninja?
I still want to be a ninja.
Brian, I must direct you immediately to the Champions Big Blue Book, where the most 80s character possible is in their NPC selection. A guy called Seeker, who's a ninja from Australia. It doesn't get any more 80s than that, buddy.
Crikey.
That's fair. Anyways, so I have read up a little bit on Oriental Adventures, and since we haven't talked about that yet, tell us a little bit about going into that project, because I've heard a lot of, we'll say, conflicting stories on
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too.
On who is responsible, we'll say.
Well, kind of responsible for what might be the right thing, but okay. So Oriental Adventures, we had done Unearthed Arcana. That went out. Random House really liked that because, hey, people bought it, and they wanted another rule book. I had always had an interest in Oriental stuff, and so it was bandied about that. And Gary had kind of said, maybe we could do this. And mind you, at this point, Gary was now off in the executive suite almost all the time. You almost never saw him. These types of things, but through other people like Jim Ward, who's our creative director kind of at the time, I think, kind of lobbied that, hey, this would be a thing. And so then it was kind of decided that, okay, you're going to do this Oriental book. I was kind of, and Gary had this guy to write it. It wasn't me. That's okay. It's not me. I can't, if he's going to decide this, I'm disappointed, of course, but what can I do? Right. But that, as kind of the guy internal, because this guy was on the outside, I would be involved in kind of like going through it and, working with this guy or whatever to, not so much working with the guy, but reviewing the manuscript and making, looking at whatever. So this guy, whom I'm just out of courtesy and not going to name, basically, he's never done anything that I know of in print at this point. Maybe he had, but he'd certainly never done anything as sizable as like Oriental Adventures or anything like that. So eventually we get a manuscript in, and it's 30 pages double spaced for a 160-page book. And this is what he's got, and this is like after months, right? And going through it, it's like this stuff is not, there's nothing here. There's not enough here. We can't. It's not going to work. And it became evident to everybody, Gary included, that this was not going to work, especially since we had a hard and fast deadline that Random House had to have the book by. or there would be, it these sounded like to me there would be serious financial consequences. Because they would lose faith in us and all this sort of stuff. They would cancel the order, and blam, then we'd be stuck with a book that we would not be able to sell to a lot of people, that sort of thing. So at that point, Gary basically turns to me on this and says, well, can you come up, can you do something? Can you take this and do something? And I basically negotiated that, yeah, I can do this. But I'm not going to use this manuscript. I'm going to have to start pretty much from scratch all over and go like mad. Because there was really I had about a 3-month writing schedule to get this done, to design it and get it written. Fortunately, up to this point, I had already been doing a lot of research, trying to do a lot of research. Had the assistance of John Pickens, who is a great researcher. Boy, he can find obscure books like nobody's business. So the got the deal. The other part of the deal was I had a regular work schedule, because we were always scheduled out like a year in advance on our work, and they couldn't shift. They could shift a little of that off me, but they couldn't shift that off me. So I was going to have to write this in my own time, on my own time. And so for that, I basically said, well, I'm going to need a contract on that. And so basically wound up spending my daytime job working on various other designs for TSR, and spent my evening job working on Oriental Adventures, to the point where it was literally, I would go in, work during the day, go home, have dinner, see my wife, go back into the office because that's where the computer was, and spend like 3 or 4 hours writing. Then go back and just do that for I was trying to do that like 5 nights a week, which was like not realistic, but I was trying as best as I could. And it did finally get to the point where it's like, I have to work on this during the day. I cannot get this done if I don't. And so I wound up doing some of it during that too. And it got done. It all got done, and amazingly enough. And and it went out. Some of the things were not as play tested as I would have liked, but we managed to play test some of it, enough of it that it was not a disaster. I'm still like it, but there are things I would change. And I'm glad you're happy about the ninja. Boy, I hated ninjas working on it.
Well, and keep in mind, I don't have any. I don't know how it plays, so I can't tell you. Was it broken? Did I cheat or anything? Because
It just busted, Brian.
What?
The ninja's busted.
Hey, that's fine. Regardless,
It's a weird split class thing.
God, is it broken?
Yeah. But actually, I think the most busted one was probably the Kensai.
Oh yeah.
Because I didn't pay as much attention to the math on their abilities as I should have.
So then I'll kind of a 2-part question. What's the thing that you're most proud of out of Oriental Adventures, and what's the one thing that you're like, if I could, I would just remove that from the whole of the book?
I don't know if there's anything I desperately would remove from the whole of the book. I would definitely revise and repair things, that sort of thing. The thing I'm most proud of is it was the opposite. It was the seed for a number of things that became part of just really standard AD&D, notably the proficiency system, because we had no way to deal with all like secondary skills, and other games just dodge that issue by just making their games entirely skill based, this sort of stuff like that. And so as a D&D character, your abilities were strictly like, I got to do this fighter stuff, and if you wanted to say I was a blacksmith or anything like that, the referee had to just kind of wave his hands and go, okay, whatever, I guess you can blacksmithy things. But with Oriental Adventures, that gave us an opportunity to kind of like, okay, that whole being the well-rounded character is kind of part of that stereotype, dare I say. And so wanted to give them mechanics that could actually allow them to be like, oh yes, I will be the poetic samurai, or the the crazed carpenter magician, kind of whatever you wanted it to be, right? So that mechanic, and it worked well. And so when it came time to do second edition, it just naturally fit in because it had already been picked up through some of the other books by that point. So that was one thing I was probably, I think was the best thing, because it was in some ways, Oriental was an opportunity to try some ideas and then see which ones of them really kind of went over. The one that I always was disappointed that didn't actually fly was the armor class by part, because you always these if you look at a lot of Hong Kong, or you looked at a lot of Chinese movies, or you always see guys wearing two pieces of armor, and they like a piece on their shoulder and they got a helmet, something like that. And it was like there was no way in the old D&D to really account for any of that. And so just kind of said, well, it's all numbers, so why don't you just kind of like assign a number value to each part, and then they can say, oh, I have these parts, and that'll give me this armor class. And it was a nice idea. Maybe it might have been too cumbersome, or just like everybody was just perfectly happy with the other one anyway. But it would allow people to like mix and match things up a little bit more and do that sort of stuff. But there you go. That's me.
On that note, was there ever talk of a second edition Oriental Adventures?
There was some, but there wasn't a pressing need for it. Oriental Adventures it sold well, but it was not like, oh my God, there's a huge demand for it. And frankly, a lot of people just look at it, it's like, well, it's already kind of sitting halfway between, AD&D and first edition and second edition. So do we really need to update it? Nah.
It was one of the better first edition books.
On the topic of second ed, I'm sort of curious about your insights about the process of creating second ed and shifting over from first ed. Like, were there any controversies behind the scenes in the bullpen about things you wanted to keep, things you want to remove?
Oh, and almost everything, probably. So the original idea to even do a second edition was, I think, driven a little bit more by kind of Gary musing about it stuff before he moved out of TSR at that point, but also and Steve Winter, who really wanted to rework the books because they're just horrible organizationally. Mm-hmm. The original books were just like, how many people memorized the page number of something because that was the only way they could find it.
Tabs and bookmarks.
Yeah, I think I can still tell you what page like the combat tables were on. I think it was page 79 or something like that. But so the idea would have been, let's take the rules, let's get and there had been a lot of product that had come out that had contradicted things in the rules, and there were a lot of clarifications from sage advice and this sort of stuff. And let's get all that stuff and let's get it all together and clean up the rules and get them so that it all would work better. And so that was kind of the original idea, and it kind of started from there. But then it was also like, let's kind of bring it a little bit more up to date, and that involves, let's integrate in, the integrating in of some of the things that appeared in previous rules involved like, oh, we really do need to make some significant changes in structure and sort of that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the biggest controversy, which was not really a controversy, but it was a huge concern, which is that we were taking essentially the biggest item that the company had in terms of sales and stuff like that, and we were changing it. And although our sales department had agreed to all of this, everybody said, yeah, we need to do this. As it got closer and closer to reality, sales department said like, oh my God, wait a minute, what about all this old product we have? What do we can't just like invalidate that. We have to so that meant there were a number of things like we thought about. Well, why don't we just reverse the armor class? Makes more sense to start at 1 and go up as you get better than to do this kind of strange start at 10 and then go into negative numbers as you got, because that always made people's head hurt when they were trying to do math and all this sort of stuff. So why don't we do that? And we looked at it and we thought about it, and we had, some of us argued for it. But then it was like, that would make it really hard to, for people who have all the old product. That's going to make it harder for the people who have all the old product, because now this they have to do all this conversion every time they do stuff. So we can't do that. And then, there were a number of other kind of like those kinds of decisions that were, it would make more sense if we did it this way, but we wanted to make sure that there was a continuity between the two. So we didn't do a lot of that stuff. And so a lot of it became kind of rolling in things that players had always accepted as this is like, their house rules for how the game worked. I used to go to conventions and tell people I'm not really changing the rules that much. I'm just like approving what you're already doing. A lot of it was stuff that had showed up in Dragon Magazine. Or like, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Let's work with that and see what we can do. And then there was a lot that had just in the previous hardbacks that had come out. And then some of the things also that had in the previous hardbacks come out were maybe not such great ideas, or were better let's wait until we get down the road and we'll do that. Because one of the things we also wanted to focus on is give everybody once again a core set. Because by the time you got to when AD&D was coming out, if you pulled out a D&D, if you pulled out your first edition books and said, "Oh, I'm going to play," and then everybody would come up, "Oh, are we going to use the Cavalier? Because I've got the Cavalier," and go like, "Oh crap, I don't have that book." What about this thing from the Wilderness Survival Guide, or this thing I saw, and suddenly you had like 18 source books that you had to have to be able to play. Yes, second edition gets to that eventually. It's a curse of every edition, but but it was also, that's why we needed to do a second edition. It's kind of like reset, get us back to a core set of books that we could reliably use when we wrote adventures, so that we wouldn't have to say like, we wouldn't have to reprint a lot of things like that. So that's what a lot of it was. It was just a lot of work.
Before we go too much further down the line, I do want to get to this in case Thagan does bounce out. Thagan did want to say that he wanted to say thank you, Zeb. You helped create a game that filled a lot of downtime while deployed in the early 80s, kept us out of a lot of trouble. So wanted to make sure
that got us into other trouble.
God knows what kind of trouble we could have got.
Just a quick follow-up. What of the changes you made from first to second ed, what stuck out to you as one of the rule changes or shifts that you're proud of?
Oh, well, I'm proud of. I'm not sure other people are proud of. Basically deciding that some of the character classes, the later character classes especially, were badly overbalanced or were just not appropriate to the kind of core kind of fantasy thing that we were focusing on. Hence, the barbarian kind of sort of appears only. But much later, the Cavalier, who was tremendously overbalanced against the other character classes, the Assassin, who was notorious for destroying party harmony, because people just never could quite restrain themselves.
That's half the fun, though. I mean, you got to embrace the chaos.
For somebody, but maybe not for the group. It was the problem. So yeah, Jim Ward actually had me write a purposely kind of inflammatory article about all that for Dragon Magazine, about like, well, this is what I'm thinking about what we need to do, right? And then we didn't do all of it because we came out later with another article and said, oh, well, we listened to your feedback and we're not doing some of this. And we actually kind of knew that we weren't going to do some of those anyway already, but it was good to, it was good to get interest going and panic a little bit, but so yeah, I think a lot of it was really just kind of pulling things together and getting it so that like, okay, this is a more usable book. I mean, Steve had the huge question too. Are we designing this for the beginner player, or are we designing it as a reference book? Because those would have been two very different kind of approaches. And so we opted for the reference book for players who know how to play the game, as opposed to, oh, here, we're going to teach you how to play the game. Yes, you can learn from the books. It's kind of hard. Still, the best advice was always just go find a group and play some sessions.
Figure it out.
It'll all become very clear to you.
When I was a young teen getting into D&D, I started with Redbox, the Mensa Redbox, but I picked up the AD&D books, but they were over my head. I was just too stupid to parse it. And then Second Ed came out. I was about 16, and then I was like, oh, this book's easy to read. And it was able to put it all together. I only went retro to 1E in the past 10 years, but it really, it's the presentation can be everything. One of the rules you guys shifted from first to second ed, I sing praise all the time, is I love the way you guys changed encounter reaction, that encounter reaction chart, where you've got the 4 categories of whether the players are being friendly, indifferent, hostile, or threatening. And then the modifier based on charisma. I don't think any D&D system has done it better since that. It's just such a dynamic system.
I'm not sure some of the D&D systems ever did it.
But that one works so well. It works so well. You use the 2d10 instead of the percentage, because in first ed you have a percentage which is sentence, so it's the higher the better. But the results can always be skewed, whereas the 2d10 system in 2e gives you the bell curve, and so everything's going to be on an average. But it just works so well. And as a DM, you look, oh, here are the possible responses, and boom, it's such a great tool for role play.
That's cool. That's one of the things too, is I really wanted to try and make sure the rules were like, hey, this is, people are all these days all about theater of the mind. That's all we had back then. We didn't have a lot of the cool, really snazzy toys that showed up later. And so, it was all designed to kind of be like, hey, can I run this all in my head? And,
Well, I'll say one thing about second edition. I still have it all up here. I don't even have to reference this book. And that's probably one of the only game systems that I have almost completely memorized. In fact, when I was a kid, of course, I grew up in Tennessee. So, we were still going through the satanic panic. And so I couldn't have D&D books. So I would literally go into the bookstore and with a notebook and copy down as many rules as I can while I'm in the bookstore for an hour or so. And then I would just memorize everything. I would just read the book and memorize everything. And that's how I ran games for the longest time, is I just, from my references in the, a notebook, but also just had things memorized. And second edition was really easy to do that, So, kudos.
I'm glad we could be your cliff notes there.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to bring up one thing, though. A lot of people aren't aware that, after you left TSR, I don't want to skip past that yet, that you did work in the video game industry. But during your time at TSR, you were involved with this, Pools of Radiance.
Oh, yeah.
Which was the first D&D computer game. So tell us a little bit about that and what your involvement was with that.
So Pools of Radiance, it wasn't the first D&D game. There were some other titles that had come out. I think IOB and other, had come out at that point and stuff like that. But with SSI, the SSI was a really great group to work with, because they really wanted to make, they just didn't want, oh yeah, great, we got the license, we'll do something, right? They wanted to make basically get that role-playing kind of experience in. And at the time, especially computer role-playing, the definition of computer role-playing was pretty lamentable from a lot of other games. So when they were doing it, they basically said, hey, we would like you guys to write us kind of the storyline scenario thing. And then, we'll work with that. And, because they thought this is a great way for them to kind of get that feel of, and we can set it in the Forgotten Realm. We'll set it in the Forgotten Realms, all this sort of stuff. And so I was involved in that. I was responsible for kind of the grand story thing, and came up with kind of led the idea that let's go with this whole kind of block by block, very kind of free form kind of approach, let's give them a freeform approach where there are things you can pick and choose, and there's a storyline that weaves through all of that. But you can go off and do all sorts of other things too. And they had with the block approach kind of came about because the way that they built the game was in 64. Imagine basically grid paper, 64 squares to a side, and so literally you made maps that were in that grid, and then basically we did keys and all that sort of stuff for them, and figured out like, okay, well, what are the missions or adventures we can have send you there, and that's how they kind of built the whole city thing that way, and so it became a lot more of a kind of that role instead of a, oh look, we're just going to go from point A to point B to C to D all the way to the end. It was a lot more, oh, here's the tavern, and they've got a whole bunch of things we can do. Some of these will only unlock after I cleared this block over here. Some will unlock when I get to a certain level, that sort of stuff. And then there was also the big story with Tyron Thraxus, the dragon, and which was a great name. I loved that name.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then and so I did the main story kind of path, and then other people, Steve Winter, I think Jeff was involved. A lot of designers all basically took a hand in like coming up with various block parts and filling it in locations and putting it all together that way. And then SSI basically took that material, and they had people on staff who were also very familiar with role playing, and basically figured out what works and what doesn't work for computer games, because we would say anything and they'd be like, oh no, we can't do that. One of the things I've learned since working in video games is, boy, what looks easy isn't always. And then it came out, and it really, it worked really well, and well enough that they did several more kind of following that general pattern and with the system they created, and so it was good.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic game. I mean, it's still to this day my favorite D&D computer game. I know most people say Baldur's Gate and all that, but actually the Gold Box, it to me feels like a real natural at the table D&D game. Like I really feel like I'm playing D&D when I play Pools of Radiance. So kudos to that. I didn't know you guys were actually like drawing the maps and stuff on graph paper. That's really interesting. That's really cool to me, because that's what we did while we're playing the game is through the dungeons on the graph paper.
There were lots of square buildings.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Did you have any involvement with any of the other Gold Box games, or just Pools of Radiance?
I think Pools of Radiance was the only. I went off then to do, was off on other stuff, and then by that point, by the time they did that one, they had kind of worked out the system of how these things would work, and so it was easier for them to say, okay, we have a plot idea and we will do it, or Jeff did Azure Bonds with them, so that things could become a little more focused towards. Either people where we had a somebody working on a product that would also be complementary to it, that sort of thing. So I did that one, and that was good.
Cool, very cool.
Low boredom threshold.
Yeah.
How did you feel about this adaptation? Was this first, or was the video game first?
Video game was first in that case. I don't have any strong opinions about that one because I don't think I ever actually looked at it too closely.
Well, you're credited as one of the chief writers, so
that's because they took all the material. Somebody took all the material that we have generated and then turned it into a product. Turned it into the product. So I may have written something on it. I can't remember. My brain's so fuzzy about some of this.
So you guys at TSR acquired quite a number of licensed products, and you were involved in a lot of those original ones. Indiana Jones, Conan, which we've had a lot of questions here, especially from Lynn about Conan. But let's talk about Indiana Jones. How'd you guys feel about acquiring the Indiana Jones license? And how did you feel about it? And I thought it was a cool game, the TSR Indiana.
We were thrilled when basically LucasArts, through their licensing team, kind of contacted and said, was like, hey, would we be interested in the Indiana Jones license? And this was after the first movie came out, but before they had done the second one. And we were like, holy crap, yeah, this is like perfect role-playing material, and the way we were seeing it, however, turned out to be somewhat different from the way they were seeing it. Because it was like, yeah, we can set this in the world of Indiana Jones, give you this excuse to have very pulpy adventures, and you can create your character, and it'll all be great. And then LucasArts got involved, and first thing we discovered is that no, we can't let you create adventure, because we can do a line of adventures for this. No, you can't create. We can't have you create adventures because everything has to be approved by George, and George doesn't have time to do that. So you can only do things that have already been approved. You can only do adventures that have already been approved, which are like, what? There's one movie. Well, they were filming the other one at that point. It says, well, we have this, and we want this to come out in time for the movie too, so we'll have that. Okay, we have 2 movies. Oh, and then there's the Marvel comic books, because there have been a line of Marvel comic books for Indiana Jones adventures, and those adventures have been approved, so we could use those. But those are already out there.
I know this is a little different, but was the Star Wars the old West End Star Wars out at the time?
No.
Okay, got it.
That came much later, and trust me, LucasArts learned a lot.
I was gonna say because
Star Wars
seems like
let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was just gonna say because it seems like a completely different approach to what we saw from the Star Wars products. But
so it's like, okay, well there's enough adventures out there. We'll work with this, and maybe eventually we'll have some approved, and we'll be able to sell. So and then the next thing, and then that one was like, okay, that's not great, but we can do that. But then the next one was like the bomb, which is, oh yeah, and so explaining how this works, and again, players will create characters, and then what? Players don't get to create characters. What do you mean? No, you can't. We can't have them creating characters, but that's what kind of role playing is all about. It's like you go create a character, you go off at adventures. No, they can't create characters. They're not allowed to create characters. They can only use characters that again have been approved, and that gave us a very short, small stable of characters to work with, including Short Round.
I don't want to be Short Round,
or the various other characters. And we could not.
Be Short Round. I'll be Willie Scott, right?
Yeah. Well, you could not include a character generation system. And we didn't find that out until after kind of like design work had already started, right? And so this is like, holy crap. So basically there is in the back under the NPC section a slightly more detailed description of how to create NPCs than would be necessary, in the hopes that smart players would be able to look at that and go like, oh, maybe I can use that. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to work. Everybody just got glommed onto the I can only be these characters kinds of thing.
Yeah.
But again, it was like, no, that's not going to help. And then we had to do the module for Temple of Doom. And so movie hadn't come out yet. And so it said, great, send us a script. Well, no, we can't send you the script. No. What do you mean you can't send? Nope, script does not leave our building. Okay, all right. So Tracy Hickman, and mind you, and I need to know what was in it too, because I was still designing the rules. Tracy Hickman was going to be writing the adventure. They flew us out to California for like 3 days or something like this. We managed to get 2 days, I think. We were permitted 2 days in the office. We went to one of their marketing offices. They showed us into a conference room, gave us copies of the script, would not let us make notes.
Holy shit. You couldn't take any notes?
No, we weren't allowed to take notes.
Wow.
We read the script. We did our best to memorize as much as we could of what was important out of all of this, and then like wrote everything down the minute we were out. As soon as we were out, we would spend time kind of writing down everything we could remember. So then from that, he had to do the Temple of Doom. He was able to he had people he could call and verify on stuff for that. I think that helped when he actually got to the writing of that. But but that was it. And it was an adventure. I am always so jealous of Bill Slavicsek when he talks about creating a chunk of the Star Wars universe, because they didn't have it and they needed it, and he needed stuff, and they said, well, okay, apparently they had learned a lot from us about maybe what not to do, and so they were much better to work for him.
So when you got the script, did they put it on a pedestal and you had to counterbalance with a bag of sand?
No.
All right, let's talk about Conan.
Yes.
Well, the Conan movie came out, right? And we all loved or hated it to various degrees. Mostly we loved it because, oh wow, it was a good, if not like wholly, you could nitpick it to death for it not being accurate to Conan in some way or another, but it was a good go at the feel. And so the Conan license was available, and it was not terribly expensive. But they were looking, the people who owned the license, not the same people as the movie, were shopping the Conan rights because they wanted to capitalize on the fact the movie had done well. So we said, okay, we decided that we could do this, and originally it was to do it just as some adventures. And at that point, the movie people I can't remember which came first. So there was the movie. But the movie people came involved because we really wanted to get Arnold Schwarzenegger's picture on the cover, kind of a thing, so we wrote some AD&D Conan adventures. I wrote one of those, the first one of those, and it was fun to do because you had to do some kind of heavy adapting of AD&D to kind of get the feel right, but it was fun to do, and it gave me a great excuse to go back and read a whole bunch of Robert E. Howard and make notes and all that sort of stuff. And then the opportunity came to do the role-playing game, and again, we were always kind of looking for branching into other areas. Was it smart to do another fantasy title when we already had D&D, the biggest fantasy title? Probably not, right? But it was Conan, and I wanted to do it, so I wasn't going to argue with it. And so did the Conan game and wanted to do something that was, again, different. Didn't want it to feel like D&D. Didn't want it just to be like, let's rehash D&D and put it in a box. Let's give it its own existence. And it was a chance to try out a different set of rules. And I liked the result, and that's also where I got to use use the color bar chart stuff there again, and that sort of thing. And it was all we were using color bar charts and everything. Used them in Indiana Jones too. But hey,
they eventually showed up in the Gamma World even. So I have a question for you based on that. Then I assume you've seen this.
I have, and I have qualms. Let's just say.
What are the qualms?
It is that they've taken a lot of what I've written, and it does at times look like it is presented that I actually was involved, and I was not involved in this.
Okay.
And I frankly haven't pursued it as much as I should, but yeah.
Okay, so misrepresentation of your involvement.
Yeah, that bothers me.
I can imagine.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought when it first came out, when I first saw it, I was like, well, you know what? That's really great that they're going back and, paying this tribute to Zeb. I think it's a great idea because the Conan system was a fun little system and, it's really, really cool stuff. But to hear you say this, I'm like, well, FTG, fuck those guys. That's what it boils down to.
I appreciate the fact that they liked the system and they did this. And so, that's why I probably have, and I haven't done anything about it. But yeah.
Fair. Well, sorry to bring up a bone of contention. My goodness, someone save the conversation quick.
So you're working with Bethesda now, right?
No, actually, I'm retired now.
Oh, you're retired? Okay.
Yeah,
You
I worked at Bethesda for 13 years, and that was the last place I was at before I retired. So worked on Elder Scrolls Online during pretty much for most of that time, and then worked in the last few years on an unannounced project. Which is basically simply to them saying, yes, we are working on something that is not Elder Scrolls and not saying anything about it.
Fair. Do you still role play? Do you still game?
Oh yeah.
What games are you playing these days?
A lot of old school stuff. Play mostly because don't have time to do anything more elaborate.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, a lot of times it's just going to conventions and running games.
Okay. You still write?
Now I do, especially since I'm now retired. Technically, I have freedom to do this. I'm trying not to overload myself, though.
Okay.
Is the thing. I want to be able to, find out what this retirement thing is all about.
Is there another game somewhere inside you that we could maybe hope your golden years will bring to us?
Probably more likely articles and stories and adventures. I have lots of games. I mean, I got a ton of games that I never saw, never did. Mostly because they were just like, yeah, that's a bad idea.
That's actually a good question from Adino. Even though we should be getting on to, we're getting towards the last half hour here. Do you keep in touch with any of the other TSR alums still?
Oh yeah. I mean, where I'm living now, Steve Winter and Jeff are close. There are, and they're the people. See Bill and see Doug Niles usually like once a year when I go out to Game Hole. Had Troy Denning. Troy Denning was in town a while back, so we went to dinner. This sort of thing. I worked. We formed long friendships there. It was a great place to work.
Nice.
And I've probably forgotten somebody important. They're a best friend.
Right now, if they're watching this, they're going, Zeb. All right, guys. Before we go into the viewer questions, let's go around one last question from anybody, and we'll try and keep them short so the viewers can get some word in here. Cody, you got anything you want to ask?
I got a lot of things I want to ask.
Yeah, of course you do.
But I'll try to keep this. Hopefully this isn't too long of a question, but I want to know. So you quit TSR in 1994, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so these were kind of I feel like was the twilight years of TSR.
It was things were. I left before things really got really bad.
Okay.
And for that, I feel a little thankful. On the other hand, they would have moved me out to the West Coast, would have saved me later on doing it.
So what prompted you to leave TSR at that time?
Well, basically, I had been working at TSR for 15 years. I was their senior designer at that point, or most senior of the senior designers, I guess would be a better way to say it. And I had done most everything, some version of most everything, and it was feeling a bit like I was constantly, that I was starting to rehash in some ways. It was harder to think of like, wow, let's do another module. What can I do? This sort of stuff. But more importantly, I got a job offer from my friend Lawrence Schick, who used to work at TSR, called me up and said, hey, would you like to come work for this video game company? And I was like, oh, video games. I don't know much about video games. Yeah, but you know a whole lot about, making adventures and stuff like that. Reassured me that, it would be, my skills would translate. And, oh, by the way, and we'll pay you more than you're making now.
The magic words.
Yeah. Like, oh. And my son was just moving changing from, what was it? I think at that point he was changing into from junior high to high school. kind of thing, and so it was this is a good time, or it's from junior high. It was from grade school to junior high. That was it, yeah. And so this was a good time to make this leap. So went and did this, and yeah, don't regret it, but wound up moving a whole lot.
Fair. Right. Logan, any final question?
I know people are going to want to talk about Planescape a bit, but the module I really enjoyed, especially at the beginning of it, was Vecna Lives. What is your background in all that Vecna stuff that's really popular now?
For which one?
Vecna Lives.
Oh, Vecna Lives.
Yeah. I enjoyed the beginning of that, and by the DM ran it when he ran it, he let us play the Circle of Eight and then the Apprentices, so it was really cool.
Yeah, that was so. Vecna Lives is like, I grew up with Greyhawk stuff. I was not like a super Greyhawk lore expert, but had used the setting even before I started at TSR, and so Vecna was this great character that they had not really done a whole lot with, and so it's like, hey, let's do a module about this, and we'll call it Vecna Lives, right? And everybody's like heard of Vecna, so they'll be like, oh my god, right? And so then it's like, okay, let's see, we got the Circle of Eight, we got all this sort of stuff. I don't want the players to be the Circle of Eight, but how do you justify that sending a bunch of non-mightiest wizards in the world to go basically deal with a demigod kind of guy? So the reason is, well, maybe they're all dead or something. And I figured this is a great way to start an adventure. We'll give everybody here, you all get to have the Circle of Eight, and then send them into this encounter that was, I think, I won't be so cocky to say it's 100% guaranteed, but it was just about almost an absolute guarantee that they would all be annihilated essentially by the end of that encounter. And done also completely fair, that and then say, oh yeah, you played through that, yeah, well, you know what, now you're all the apprentices of those guys, and they want you to go find out what happened to them. And if nothing was going to inspire terror in characters at that point, I figured players, then I don't know what I could do.
It's still what I want to acquire today. It was one of my favorite adventures to play as a player.
So yeah, the fun part was trying to figure out how to have Vecna make it pretty much impossible for all these wizards, these super powerful wizards and heroes and stuff, to really not stand a chance without basically cheating everything. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, Vecna is really, really smart. And so he is going to prepare the best possible defense setup he can. And I'm sure there's probably somebody who managed to kill Vecna at that point, in which went, oh, Vecna's over. But
Brian, any final questions for Zeb before we go to the viewers?
Yeah, so with Wizards of the Coast having released, at least as far as I can tell, all the old books on PDF, so at least this way they're still available. If there was one of the products that you worked on that you're most excited about, that you would really want people to check out just to, either learn a little bit more about the history or more about your design style, what would be the one product you would recommend?
I would say actually Planescape, the original Planescape, not the latest version that came out, which I have to admit I've only barely glanced at, so I can't say a whole lot about that. But I think there was a lot that was left behind in the original Planescape, and it would that's, I think, something that I think players are missing out now.
Okay, Sean, any final question?
Yeah. What's your favorite game of all time? Whether it's yours or not, just the one that you always, look forward to playing.
Oh, wow. The one that I always look forward to playing is probably, in role-playing, it's probably Call of Cthulhu.
I knew you were going to say that. Because
it's just a really well put together a set of rules to capture that particular mythos environment thing. You know you're going to die on this thing. You know you're going to go mad.
At best, you're going to go
doing well.
Those are the good ones. Those are the winners. Yeah.
If you're on top of your game, you're batshit crazy.
But getting to that point is really what's a whole lot of fun about it.
Fair.
So that's probably in RPGs. That's probably my favorite kind of alternate go-to. As for other games, there are so many, it's really hard to say. For a while I was very into poker. I can't say that I was very into poker in a really good way, but I was into poker.
Poker's a fine game.
But there's lots. I still have a fondness for old war games, but I can never find anybody to play them, that sort of thing.
Okay.
I'll play with you.
There you go. All right, guys, we're gonna go to the audience now. I guess Cody, sorry, buddy, I gotta do this since we're taking over the admin like we're supposed to now. It's time for you guys in the chat to ask your questions. Be respectful, please. And as always, super chats will be taken before any other question, just because you paid for the privilege. So who's got the first question popping up from this moment on? Now, there's a ton that went by. If you got one that thought was great, re-ask it, and we'll hit it as fast as we can. Remember, we've got like 20 minutes left with the gentleman. And now they go dead silent.
Yeah.
All right, Robert Gray gets the first question up. He says, you were with TSR in 1991 when the Palace of Silver Princesses was released and recalled on the same day. What exactly caused that recall and what went on behind the scenes?
Oh, Palace of Silver Princess. So this has like it's a little bit more of a history than just Palace of Silver Princess because, like I said, we had a development department. And their job was to take product and kind of massage it and get it, So the guys over in development department had gotten Expedition to the Barrier Peaks and had, which was written by Gary. And so they had done the things that they normally do. They had, made adjustments, and none of it was drastic. But when Gary got a hold of it, shit hit the fan. It's like, oh my God, how dare you touch my work, kind of a thing, so it really burned these guys. These guys got burned badly. So it's like development department's not supposed to make unauthorized, and so it's like, okay, all right, we're not supposed to touch anything. And so that's kind of like, all right, so then Palace of the Silver Princess came in. And this had been something that was it was done outside done outside the normal design department processes. So it shows up, right? There's been a lot of like, Gene wrote this thing. It's a thing by a woman. We really want this done. And, and it comes in. And it's just bad. It's just not good. But Lawrence, who was design director, he kind of goes back and he gets told, no, we promised the Random Mouse, it's got to be done, and it needs to go out. And he's like, okay. And he kind of takes responsibility for kind of guiding it through, and working with Gene was not real easy because. But so it goes out and it goes to the art department, and they look at this thing and they're going like, oh my God, this thing is not, there was, for TSR's level of community standard kind of stuff, this was clearly at points just like, no, this is not the kind of community standard stuff we do. We were comic book code kind of level of things. This was like, all right, there's the woman tied by her hair to a beam being poked by the little dwarves with the pointy sticks thing, and it's like, what, there was just a lot of like implied strange things, fetishes and stuff going on in this. And you read it today and it's like, what? This is just, it's not good, but this is not like, oh my God, horrible in that sense. But it was, at the time, that's not what TSR did. So the artists get a hold of it, and they can't take this. A couple of them just cannot take this stuff seriously at all. It's like, oh my God, this is like. So they interpret the pictures as they see fit, which led to some kind of very odd art. And it's like, why is these art requests that they had gotten, and it all gets done, and it gets put together, gets printed, and then they go around and they distribute the office copies, and everybody, and it's just a kind of a custom. Everybody got an office copy, and the office copy lands on the desktop. I think Kevin Bloom was at that point one of the 3 top executives in the thing, who goes through it, and it's like, oh my God. Because they had never looked at this thing really before this, right? And even though people have been telling them this is not good, right? Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, instantly, or they instantly like, oh my God, we cannot allow this to go out. So they basically scotch the shipping of it. They, in the night, somehow take all the office copies back out of people's offices without telling people, right? The only way you wound up if you had a copy is if you took it home, like that weekend or something. And then it's like, but then they still have this problem. Oh my God, we have to have this product in the Random House because we promised it to Random House. Random House was everything. And so Tom Mulvey, fast writer, clever guy, they turn to Tom and say, Tom, you got to generate a replacement for this 32-page module. You're going to have like 2 weeks or something like that, which is just like kind of an insane amount of time to get this done. It might have been even less, I can't remember, but it was just a horrible amount of time. So he says, okay, I'll do it, right? Tom was game for anything. But I need a copy of the module. He didn't have a copy of the module because I'd taken it out of his office. Says, I need a copy of the module to see what's in there, what I can use, what I can match up to the art, right? This sort of stuff. And so they finally had to find him a copy of the module, get that for him. And he grinds out the revised Palace of Silver Princess, and it goes out, and they print it up, and it goes out, and it makes it in time, saves the day. Meanwhile, they have all these copies of Palace Silver Princess. Now, there is a myth that they exist in a landfill somewhere, and that is not a myth. They do exist in a landfill somewhere. One of the guys I know who worked with there, his job who was basically our facilities guy and kind of general shipping guy and all that stuff, was to go out and watch them bury it all and make sure that it got buried, got destroyed.
Wow. All right. Adino the Esnite says, who was the best DM at TSR?
Oh my God, there were a lot of them. I mean, it really is, could vary by day almost, but it was a little bit, depending on the style of what. Lawrence Schick was always a good DM, clever, and had put together good adventures. Errol Otis was an entertaining DM because he was just crazed. Would be just like amazingly, crazy things, and there were a lot, and that sort of stuff. I won't rank myself in any of this because that's not the question. Skip Williams is a really good DM. There were just almost all of us ran games at one point or another, and a few of us were just outright bad at it because it was our living.
Well, we'll talk to that in Dave Mills' question. When was the last time you played D&D?
Probably 3 weeks ago.
There you go.
Yeah.
Which edition? Which edition? Yeah.
It's an OSR.
We won't make you say no. That's
old school stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's leave that dog sleep, please. All right. Dragon Shadow says, was there anything left out of the original Planescape that you regret not being able to keep?
Not really, because there was so little time to create it that there wasn't a lot of room for to create excess material.
Fair.
You tended to learn to write what you needed to write and not overwrite. So a lot of times people go like, "Wow, there must be like lots of leftover from whatever." No, there's, we made what we needed for it. And so there wasn't a lot of leftover material. There were things we had to change.
Mhm.
The Lady of Pain always has the entertaining story of originally I wanted to call her Our Lady of Pain, and that didn't fly real well with the upper management.
I wonder why.
And then, so then it was like, no, you can't name her that at all. Well, you have to come up with a different name. Okay, how about The Lady of Pain? Brilliant.
Gary Williamson doesn't have a question, but he says, "Thank you, Zeb, for all the memories."
You're
Uh,
welcome.
Now, Phil the Thrill says, "What is the one thing you like or don't like about the state of role playing today?"
Boy, the state of role playing today. I like the fact that it still is a state of role playing today. That's very, and I mean, I know there are issues with fifth edition. I know that there are, it's got power scaling problems. It's got a number of things like that. But it has done, one of the things I really liked is it pulled way back, at least initially, from the, oh my God, we must have a rule for everything approach that 3.5 had taken, which, frankly, I had problems with that because I could never figure out all the rules in 3.5. And it's gone back more to the, okay, if you're not sure, kind of make things up a little bit. But at the same time, the stuff I don't like is the need to constantly give more to the players. Oh, we got to make players give them crazier and newer stuff. That's why I like, playing with more kind of the basic and expert. The old is, no, you don't really have like 10 billion things that you can suddenly do. You have, a pretty limited set, and it's more about your creativity and role playing, working with that stuff.
Okay.
And the fact that, you could die horribly.
Yes. Victor Gibson says, "Zeb, what was left out of Flames of Doom for classic Marvel RPG? It was my favorite of the series."
Oh, I don't know as anything was. Again, you wrote to fit. And Flames of Doom, we had the storyline already from Marvel, so we tried to follow that as reasonably well as we could. It was mostly trying to translate that into a good adventure for players, where players might actually may have already knew the whole plot line there of Flames of Doom, and still trying to keep it feel fresh for them. And so again, I don't think stuff was left out per se. If anything, I was always the one that was underwriting.
Underwriting. Nice. Raven says, "I think we already answered this though when you told your story. Was your vision of Star Frontiers more serious hard sci-fi than what was eventually published?"
That was our goal. Is we wanted to basically be a much more scientific driven. There were things that were left out of that, like there was a fairly simple planet generation system that was based off of what at the time the current state of thought of, like, what are the requirements for a habitable planet. So you could figure out the mass and the gravity and all that sort of stuff. And it's fun working up tables for all that. But
Okay.
yeah, we had a simple space flight thing there that we were using in Star Frontiers that pretty much just went away.
Paydar says, "A question I got asked, I've asked before the panel in general, but I would love to hear Zeb's opinion. If you could have gotten the rights to any IP for an RPG, what would it be?"
Wow. The trick about IPs is that they already kind of define a lot of the universe. So in many ways, probably the Star Wars one was a really good IP. I mean, and partially because they didn't have a lot of stuff there, and so Bill got to make up a lot of stuff, and that's very satisfying for a designer. A lot of the really good ones, people have made games out of those IPs. the Lord of the Rings one finally to get made. The problem with the Lord of the Rings ones, it's very, very defined, and it's essentially that so much of that is devoted to telling one story. It's pretty much hard to see like open-ended adventuring in some ways. So it's you want to look for a universe that allows you to do all that. Doc Savage for me was always one I would have loved to have done, but it's just so campy in any way. Nobody would ever.
Are you kidding? There's a huge Doc Savage fandom out there. They would look at that. Cody's like me. There you go, right away. All right, this one I want to know. Dave Nell gets a second question, which was, what's up with Errol Otis falling through the ceiling of that conference room?
Well, it wasn't that conference room. It was my office. So at the time we were in this building called the Old Hotel Claire in downtown Lake Geneva, which when we had it was on the verge of being condemned. The floors kind of went like that, and there was it was a 3-story thing, but there was actually a 4th floor that there was a door to up on the 3rd floor that you could go up to, which had been an old ballroom apparently. But basically that door was always kept locked and we were told not to go up there. So, since it was locked, we never went up there. Well, one Friday late in the day when most everybody's left, Errol Otis had come up because he was on the art department there on the 2nd floor. He was up and killing time with somebody and discovered that door had been unlocked for some reason. And so he said, I'm going to go up there and see what's up there. Because it's like, no, we're all told don't go up there. So he's going to go up and see what's up there. And he gets up there, and apparently it's a big, had a big old ballroom, but they'd ripped out all the floorboards and everything. So basically, if you were going to walk around it all, you had to kind of like step from joist to joist, and there were all this sort of thing. And he was up there poking around doing that. And I'm down the hall talking with somebody, and suddenly there is this loud crash. And go down the hallway and, looking around trying to figure out what it is, and, hearing Errol yell him, and finally get down to my office, which was my office at the time. Office has changed over a while. And there are Errol Otis's legs dangling from the ceiling. And so, he had fallen through, he had missed a step and hit the drywall, whatever it was the ceiling was, the popcorn that was the ceiling, and had gone through that. Got him out. There's nobody around. There's nobody we could really tell. Wound up eventually having to call somebody, let them know. So it's just one of those dumb things that happened.
Sound Surgeon says, was anything that was originally written / created that ultimately got axed?
There always is. There are projects that mostly they didn't begin because we had such deadlines to meet and so much product to put out. Generally, it didn't get to the stage where you were actually signed to write it, where it was not going to come out, because we had steps before that. A lot of things got axed at the concept stage. We would write up what were called briefs, which were basically little one-pagers that were like, okay, this is for a module. This is kind of the story or plot of this module, or product or whatever it was. And we were kind of required to generate a whole stack of these. And then when planning came around, they would sit down, they'd kind of go through all the briefs and they'd look at them and say, like, oh yeah, this looks like a good idea, or nobody's going to buy this, or maybe we don't know about that, but maybe. And they would sort out the ones that they thought looked good. They also had other things they knew that we needed to do, because okay, we need X number of modules for this line. We need 2 source books or whatever. So we were always kind of filling slots.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff just died at that point. Now, we're not doing War Rafts of Kron or whatever. I think probably we did do War Rafts of Kron actually, but but there were a lot of things that we proposed that just never, no, we're not going to do that. And so that's where a lot of things just kind of get tabled.
Okay. We got about 5 questions left, and those are going to be it, guys. So we're going to stop taking any more questions so we can get through the last little bit here and let the gentleman get on with his evening. So we're going to go to Coco B, who says, how do you feel about the fanboy attention at cons and such? And he also says, thanks. He started with BX in the 80s and just played BX on Monday.
Oh, well, I'm not going to complain about the fanboy attention, that's for sure. And my wife says it always. She always can tell. She tells me it always gives me a nice big ego boost. And so, hey. But really, the stuff that I've noticed more and more that I am really most appreciative about is when people tell me that these things really made a difference for them.
Mm-hmm.
That for some people it was like, God, it kept them from doing, terrible things, or having to, it was a way for dealing with a really bad situation at the time, that sort of stuff. Or even, like, wow, it helped me read better.
Yeah.
And it's hearing that, these things that we did kind of make a difference that we weren't even trying to do. But that's the stuff that's really nice. I like
Jeff D once told me that for Villains and Vigilantes, he got a letter from a mathematician who thanked him for that game because it made him fall in love with math. And it was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sound Surgeon asked, did you create Bug Hunters, the Aliens RPG clone, because of the film rights?
Well, I didn't create Bug Hunters.
Well, that ends that question. Moving right on. Dragon Shout says, have you ever thought about making your own game?
Yes, I have thought about it, and then I have thought, do I really want to put myself through that?
Fair. Game Masters, by the way, hey man, says, was there ever a modular adventure that you worked on that you felt or wanted to always return back to and add on to, or maybe make a sequel to, or something?
A couple. I actually at conventions run an adventure called Return to the Isle of Dread, which is fairly entertaining. So obviously I want to go back to some things. The Master of the Desert Nomads Temple of Death series, which is always interesting. It'd be nice to go back to that and do like the 10 years later kind of story that would be there, because it's such a strange kind of one. So there's those. A lot of them, it's just the fun is in coming up with that initial idea and really, going crazy with it. I would have to like look at my resume or something to figure out what the hell.
Get on that. Let's go. No, it's okay. We can wait for another time. And appropriately, the last question of the night will be from Len, who says the Conan RPG is clearly way more kid-friendly than the source material. Any insight on how you navigated that?
Is our code of standards. No outright gore, no sex must be only alluded to, not so there was a lot of stuff that you could not simply put in print that would be like, oh yeah, that's in Conan, right? So you had to you found lots of euphemisms for things, and you looked for how to get the right tone of the adventure without having to go into the, and then there's blood spewing everywhere kind of thing.
Well, listen,
Germany didn't like that either.
I didn't ask you my last question because I wanted to wait before we were done all this so I could ask my last question, because I'm not sure if it even relates to you or not. There is a script floating around on the internet called The Dragons of Krull, which was apparently the script that Gary Gygax had approved for a D&D movie that eventually fell through while he was doing his Hollywood thing, that eventually became the movie we know as Krull. Which is, it's a very, it's similar, but there's no sci-fi in it, none of that nonsense going on. Did you guys hear anything about this movie stuff that was going on back in the day, or was it just all smoke and mirrors?
Oh, well, all of that was out on the East Coast or on the West Coast, and so we all would hear about this all indirectly. William Golding was supposedly working on a script. This the guy who did Princess Bride was supposedly working on a script. This sort of stuff, and we didn't, not until the guys who actually did the first Dungeons and Dragons movie got involved, did we ever actually start seeing any involvement in the office kind of a thing, because everything else was Gary on the West Coast, and he was dealing with us, and he kept that all very, very tight to it.
Gary seems like a guarded guy. Zeb, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. You have been an absolute gem of a guest, and sir, as we're seeing fly by, you have impacted the lives of so many of us and so many people. I can clearly say everybody on this panel certainly has been impacted by the work that you and the others did.
That Brian guy.
Except for that Brian guy. He's into Shadowrun. What are you going to do? But it was really, really a damn pleasure having you on tonight, and I hope we can get you back. And actually, what I would love to do is get you and Jeff on at the same time and just.
Oh my God, that could be. The thing is, he'd start remembering all that sorts of stuff, and I go like, "Oh, did that happen?"
You know what? That could be worth it, guys. Say your pieces and thank the man, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Thank you all, folks. Thank you, everybody who joined us on chat.
There we go. Logan, Sean, Brian, Cody, any final words for the man?
No,
No,
just
thank you. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
the succinct way to put it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, listen. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I want to say
No,
sorry
no,
for
no.
being a disappointment, but it was an absolute pleasure to meet you, Zeb. Thank you.
you're always a disappointment, Brian.
Are you serious? Shall I do the disapproving father look that I always give you? Because I can do that.
It's my role. I accept it.
Anyway, thank you again, Zeb, for being here. Thanks everybody who joined us in the chat and on all the streams for this one, and all the great questions and the super chats and the memberships and all the good stuff. This was a lot of fun. As always, I am Bear the Gen X GM saying peace, love, geek, and we'll see you on the next one. And I guess in the meantime, roll for initiative.